March 27th, 1977. This date is etched in the annals of aviation history, not for a groundbreaking achievement, but for a catastrophic event that shook the world. This is a date we will always remember in aviation history. It marks the day when a series of unfortunate events culminated in the deadliest aviation disaster ever recorded. It was a day of terrible tragedy. The skies over Tenerife, one of Spain's Canary Islands, were filled with the promise of routine flights, but fate had other plans. On this day, high above Tenerife, one of Spain's Canary Islands, something awful happened. The island, known for its serene beauty and tourist appeal, became the backdrop for a horrific event. Two huge airplanes, a KLM Flight 4805 and a Pan Am Flight 1736, crashed on the runway. 583 people died. The collision was not just a mechanical failure, but a tragic confluence of human errors and miscommunications. It is still the worst accident in aviation history. The wreckage and the haunting images of that day serve as a grim reminder of the fragility of human life and the importance of stringent safety measures. This video will look at everything that led to this disaster. We will delve into the sequence of events, the decisions made, and the errors that compounded to create this catastrophe. We'll talk about why the planes went to the Canary Islands, the foggy runway, the mistakes in communication, and the final crash. Each element played a crucial role in the unfolding of this disaster. We'll also talk about the investigations that happened after. The painstaking efforts of investigators to piece together the events and understand what went wrong were monumental, and how the Tenerife Airport disaster changed aviation safety rules around the world. The lessons learned from this tragedy have been instrumental in shaping modern aviation protocols. The Tenerife Airport disaster teaches us how important clear communication and strong safety rules are. It underscores the need for constant vigilance and adherence to established procedures. It shows us what can happen when people make mistakes and unexpected things happen at the same time. The disaster was a stark reminder of the potential consequences of even small errors in judgment, but it also shows how much we learned from this accident. The aviation community came together to analyze, learn, and implement changes to prevent such a tragedy from happening again, and how the aviation industry changed to make sure it never happens again. The legacy of the Tenerife Airport disaster is one of improved safety and a commitment to ensuring the skies are safer for everyone. The Tenerife Airport. Disaster didn't start in the sky. It began on the ground with a series of events that seemed unrelated at first, but would soon converge in a catastrophic way. It started with a bomb threat on a nearby island, Gran Canaria. This threat was serious enough to cause immediate concern and action. This threat closed Gran Canaria Airport, where both KLM Flight 4805 and Pan Am Flight 1736 were supposed to land. The closure was sudden and unexpected, causing a ripple effect that would soon be felt far beyond Gran Canaria. These two big planes, full of people going on vacation, had to go to Los Rodeos Airport in Tenerife instead. The passengers, unaware of the looming danger, were simply looking forward to their holidays. The smaller airport wasn't ready for such big planes, especially not two at the same time. The infrastructure was not designed to handle the sudden influx of large aircraft, creating a logistical nightmare. Los Rodeos Airport in the mountains of Tenerife was very foggy that day. The thick fog reduced visibility drastically, making navigation difficult for both pilots and ground crews. This small airport, a temporary stop for the planes, would soon become the scene of a terrible accident. The fog, combined with the unexpected traffic, set the stage for a disaster that no one could have predicted. The diverted planes and several others filled up the airport's limited space. The tarmac was crowded, and the usual procedures were disrupted by the sheer number of aircraft. This made things hard for the ground crews and air traffic controllers. They were under immense pressure to manage the situation, ensuring safety while dealing with the unexpected surge in traffic. The diversion to Los Rodeos started a chain of events that, along with human error and unexpected problems, would lead to disaster. Each decision, each action seemed logical at the time, but would later be seen as part of a tragic sequence. The crowded airport, the unfamiliar surroundings for the pilots, and the rush to get passengers to their final destinations all added to the stress. The pilots, experienced but now in an unfamiliar environment, had to rely on their training and instincts. No one knew that these things, which seemed small on their own, would soon come together with terrible results. The combination of factors created a perfect storm, leading to one of the deadliest aviation disasters in history. As the events unfolded, the true scale of the tragedy became apparent. The Tenerife Airport disaster would be remembered not just for the loss of life, but for the lessons it taught the aviation industry. In the aftermath, changes were made to improve safety and prevent such a disaster from happening again. The lessons learned from Tenerife have shaped modern aviation, making the skies safer for everyone. The story of the Tenerife Airport disaster is a sobering reminder of how quickly things can go wrong and how important it is to be prepared for the unexpected. It's a story of tragedy, but also of resilience and improvement. As the planes landed at Los Rodeos Airport, thick fog covered the runway and everything around it. No one could see very far, which made things even harder for the pilots and ground crews. This fog would be a big part of what happened next, making it hard to see and making a tough situation even worse. The fog made communication very difficult. The control tower and the planes talked to each other by radio, but the fog created a lot of static. This made it hard for pilots to hear and understand the control tower. These communication problems, made worse by the fog, would be a major reason for the crash. Everyone at Los Rodeos Airport felt the tension. Passengers, tired of waiting and the unexpected change of plans, were stuck in their seats. Pilots wanting to finish their flights struggled with the unfamiliar airport and the growing pressure. The fog, like a silent observer, got thicker and thicker, making the situation seem even more dangerous. Everything was in place for a tragedy. The Tenerife Airport disaster wasn't caused by one big mistake. It was caused by many small mistakes, miscommunications, and misunderstandings that happened at the same time. The biggest problem was that the KLM pilots and the air traffic controllers didn't understand each other. The KLM captain, wanting to take off quickly, misunderstood what the air traffic controller told him. Thinking he was clear to take off, the captain started moving the KLM 747 down the runway. He didn't know that the Pan Am plane was still on the same runway, hidden in the fog. At the same time, the KLM and Pan Am planes were talking on the radio at the same time. This caused more confusion. The control tower tried to tell the KLM plane to wait, but the Pan Am's message covered up the control tower's message. This made the KLM captain think he could take off. The foggy runway, the crowded airport, the pressure to take off, and the communication problems all came together at the worst possible time. The KLM 747, engines loud, sped down the foggy runway. The roar of the engines was deafening, echoing through the dense fog that enveloped the entire airfield. The visibility was almost zero, making it a perilous journey from the start. The pilots, seasoned veterans, knew the risks, but were determined to take off despite the challenging conditions. The fog was so thick that it seemed to swallow the massive aircraft whole, making it nearly invisible to anyone watching from a distance. The pilots looked hard into the fog, their hearts pounding. Every second felt like an eternity as they strained their eyes to see through the impenetrable whiteness. The tension in the cockpit was palpable, with every crew member acutely aware of the potential dangers lurking in the fog. They communicated in clipped, urgent tones, their voices betraying the anxiety they felt. The instruments were their only guide, but even those seemed unreliable in such extreme conditions. The fog created an eerie, almost surreal atmosphere, heightening the sense of impending doom. They couldn't see the Pan Am 747, which was still on the runway, hidden by the thick fog. The Pan Am plane, a giant in its own right, was a mere shadow in the mist. Its presence was a deadly obstacle that the KLM pilots were unaware of. The fog acted as a shroud concealing the danger that lay ahead. The Pan Am crew, equally blind to the KLM's approach, were also navigating the treacherous conditions, unaware of the impending disaster. The two behemoths were on a collision course, their fates intertwined by the relentless fog. Its lights were just faint glows in the white. The runway lights, usually a beacon of safety, were dim and ghostly in the fog. The faint glows of the Pan Am's lights were barely discernible. offering no real warning to the KLM pilots. The fog distorted and diffused the light, making it almost impossible to judge distances or identify obstacles. It was a scene of utter confusion and disorientation, with the pilots relying on their training and instincts to navigate through the murk. By the time the KLM pilots saw the huge Pan Am plane, it was much too late. The realization hit them like a thunderbolt, a moment of sheer horror as the massive silhouette of the Pan Am 747 loomed out of the fog. Their shocked faces told the story of a nightmare unfolding in real time. There was no time to react, no time to avoid the inevitable. The two planes were on a collision course, and the KLM pilots could only watch in helpless terror as the disaster unfolded before their eyes. The KLM captain, seeing the danger, tried to pull up his plane to avoid the crash. He yanked the control column with all his might, desperate to lift the aircraft off the ground. The engines roared in protest as the plane struggled to ascend. It was a last-ditch effort, a desperate bid to escape the collision. The plane's nose lifted, but it was too little, too late. The sheer weight and speed of the aircraft made it impossible to gain enough altitude in such a short distance. The captain's valiant attempt was doomed from the start. But the KLM plane was going too fast. The speed was both an asset and a curse. It gave the plane the momentum needed for takeoff, but it also made it uncontrollable in such a critical situation. The runway was running out and the plane was hurtling towards disaster at breakneck speed. The pilots had no choice but to brace for impact, knowing that any attempt to slow down or change course would be futile. The aircraft was a juggernaut, unstoppable and unforgiving. It hit the top of the Pan Am 747 with a terrible screech of metal. The crash was powerful. The sound of the collision was deafening, a cacophony of tearing metal and shattering glass. The impact was so forceful that it sent shockwaves through both aircraft. The KLM plane's undercarriage tore through the upper fuselage of the Pan Am, creating a scene of utter devastation. The sheer violence of the crash was unimaginable, a catastrophic event that would be etched in the memories of all who witnessed it. Everyone in the top part of the Pan Am plane died instantly. The upper deck, where many passengers were seated, bore the brunt of the impact. The force of the collision was so great that it left no chance for survival. The scene inside the Pan Am plane was one of chaos and destruction, with debris and bodies strewn everywhere. The survivors, those in the lower part of the aircraft, were in a state of shock, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of the disaster. A large part of the plane was ripped open. The gaping hole in the fuselage was a stark testament to the violence of the collision. The aircraft's interior was exposed to the elements, a twisted mass of metal and shattered components. The structural integrity of the plane was compromised, making it a death trap for those still inside. The sight was both horrifying and surreal, a nightmarish vision of destruction. The KLM plane, badly damaged and on fire, went up in the air for a short time before crashing back down on the runway. The flames engulfed the aircraft, turning it into a blazing inferno. The damaged plane struggled to stay airborne, but the fire and structural damage made it impossible. It was a brief, tragic flight, ending in a fiery crash back on the runway. The impact was devastating. Adding to the already catastrophic scene, it slid to a stop, broken and burning. The wreckage of the KLM plane came to a halt, a smouldering ruin on the runway. The fire continued to rage, consuming what was left of the aircraft. The scene was one of utter devastation, with both planes reduced to twisted, burning hulks. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning fuel. It was a scene of unimaginable horror, a tragic end to a disastrous flight. The crash, a horrible sight for those who saw it and a sound heard for miles, was the start of a desperate fight to survive and a race to save anyone who could be saved. Emergency responders rushed to the scene, battling the flames and searching for survivors. The chaos was overwhelming, with rescuers working tirelessly amidst the burning wreckage. The sight of the crash was seared into the memories of those who witnessed it, a tragic reminder of the fragility of life and the devastating consequences of human error. The race to save lives was a testament to the bravery and resilience of the emergency crews, who faced unimaginable horrors in their efforts to rescue the survivors. Subscribe and follow for more videos.